So you want to understand the Bible, but you only have a few minutes? Let's oversimplify 8 of the most famous and iconic stories ever told. Adam and Eve. Our story begins in a perfect garden called Eden. God created the first 2 humans, Adam and Eve, and gave them this amazing place to live. They had everything they could ever want and only one rule. Don't eat the fruit from this one specific tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For a while, things were great. But then a serpent, who was actually Satan in disguise, shows up and convinces Eve to try the fruit. He tells her it won't kill her. It will just make her wise like God. Eve takes a bite and gives some to Adam. The moment they do, everything changes. They realize they're naked, they feel shame for the first time, and they hide from God. This one act of disobedience, called sin, broke their perfect relationship with God and introduced brokenness and death into the world. They were kicked out of the garden, and humanity's long, complicated story began. Noah's Ark. Fast forward a few generations, and the world has become a pretty terrible place. People are violent, corrupt, and have almost completely forgotten about God. It gets so bad that God decides to hit the reset button with a giant world-covering flood. But there was one guy, Noah, who was still faithful. So God tells Noah to build a massive boat, an ark. He gives him specific instructions: make it huge, cover it in pitch, and build rooms inside. Why? Because Noah needed to gather his family and 2 of every kind of animal, a male and a female, to save them from the flood. People thought he was crazy, building a giant boat in the middle of dry land. But Noah trusted God. For 40 days and 40 nights, it rained. The flood covered everything, but Noah, his family, and all the animals were safe inside the ark. When the waters finally went down, God made a promise, sealing it with a rainbow in the sky, that he would never again destroy the earth with a flood. 3. Moses and the Red Sea. Hundreds of years later, God's people, the Israelites, are slaves in Egypt. Life is brutal. God chooses a man named Moses to lead them to freedom. Moses, who was an Israelite but raised as an Egyptian prince, goes to the Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go." Pharaoh, not surprisingly, says no. So God sends 10 devastating plagues upon Egypt. We're talking rivers of blood, swarms of locusts, and 3 days of complete darkness. The final plague, the death of every firstborn son, finally convinces Pharaoh to release them. The Israelites flee, but Pharaoh changes his mind and sends his army after them. The Israelites are trapped between the powerful Egyptian army and the vast Red Sea. It looks like it's all over, but Moses, at God's command, raises his staff, and the sea miraculously parts, creating a dry path for them to cross. Once they're safely on the other side, the waters crash back down, swallowing the entire Egyptian army. It was a rescue of epic proportions. 4. David versus Goliath. This is the ultimate underdog story. The Israelites are at war with the Philistines, who have a secret weapon, a giant of a man named Goliath. He's over 9 feet tall, covered in bronze armor, and he taunts the Israelite army every day, challenging anyone to a one-on-one fight. Everyone is terrified. Then, a young shepherd boy named David shows up. He's just there to bring his older brother some food, but he hears Goliath's taunts and is appalled that no one is defending God's honor. David, armed with nothing but a shepherd's staff, a slingshot, and 5 smooth stones, volunteers to fight the giant. The king tries to give him armor, but it's too big. David walks out to face Goliath, who just laughs at him. But David, full of faith, says he comes in the name of the Lord. He slings a single stone, it hits Goliath right in the forehead, and the giant comes crashing down. David's victory shows that with God, it doesn't matter how small you are, you can overcome any giant. Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel was an Israelite living in exile in Babylon, but he was so wise and capable that he rose to become one of the most powerful officials in the kingdom. Other officials became jealous and tricked the king into signing an unbreakable law. For the next 30 days, Anyone who prayed to any god or man other than the king would be thrown into a den of hungry lions. Daniel knew about the law, but he didn't change his routine. 3 times a day, he went to his room, opened his windows toward Jerusalem, and prayed to God. His enemies caught him and reported him to the king, who was devastated but had to follow his own law. Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. The king was so worried he couldn't sleep. At the first light of dawn, he rushed to the den and called out to Daniel. Incredibly, Daniel answered. He said God had sent an angel to shut the mouths of the lions, and he was completely unharmed. It was a powerful testament to Daniel's faithfulness and God's protection. Jonah and the whale. This is the story of the runaway prophet. God tells a prophet named Jonah to go to the wicked city of Nineveh and warn them to repent. But Jonah hated the Ninevites. They were Israel's enemies. So instead of obeying, he hops on a boat going in the exact opposite direction. God, however, is not so easily ignored. He sends a massive storm that threatens to sink the ship. The sailors, terrified, figure out Jonah is the problem. Jonah tells them to throw him overboard to save themselves. They reluctantly do, and the storm immediately stops. But Jonah doesn't drown. Instead, God sends a giant fish, often called a whale, to swallow him whole. Jonah spends 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, where he finally repents and agrees to do what God asked. The fish then spits him out onto dry land. Jonah goes to Nineveh, preaches his short sermon, and the entire city, from the king down to the animals, repents. The story is a powerful and somewhat humorous lesson about God's mercy and how you can't run from his call. The birth of Jesus. After centuries of waiting for the promised king, the New Testament opens with a miracle. An angel appears to a young virgin named Mary and tells her she will give birth to the Son of God. She and her fiancé, Joseph, travel to their ancestral hometown of Bethlehem for a census. When they arrive, the town is so crowded that there are no rooms available. Mary ends up giving birth in the most humble of places, a stable, likely a cave where animals were kept. She wraps her newborn son, Jesus, in cloths and lays him in a manger, a feeding trough for animals. That night, an angel announces the birth to a group of shepherds in a nearby field who rush to see the newborn king. A little while later, wise men from the east who had followed a special star arrived to worship him, bringing gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. It was a quiet, humble beginning for the one who would change the world forever. The crucifixion and resurrection. This is the most important story in the entire Bible. After about 3 years of teaching and performing miracles, Jesus was arrested by the religious leaders who saw him as a threat. He was put through a series of illegal trials, falsely accused, and sentenced to death by crucifixion, a brutal Roman method of execution. He was nailed to a cross and he died. His followers were devastated. Their hope seemed lost. They buried him in a tomb, and a giant stone was rolled in front of the entrance. But the story doesn't end there. 3 days later, some of his female followers went to the tomb and found the stone rolled away and the tomb empty. An angel told them, "He is not here, he has risen." Jesus then began appearing to his disciples, alive and well. He wasn't a ghost, he ate with them and showed them the wounds in his hands and feet. His resurrection proved that he had conquered sin and death, and it is the foundation of the Christian faith. It's the ultimate demonstration that even in the darkest moments, God has the final word, and that word is life. So these were some of the most famous and iconic Bible stories ever. What do you want to oversimplify next? Tell me in the comments below.